DnDTime Talks is a talk show Pete and I do every week here on twitch.tv/DnDTime, where we talk about all things Dungeons and Dragons. And like we said, this week's topic, we're going to build a starter deck. Just
Yes.
because I know the beginning's not going to be in the VOD now, so now it's here.
Oh,
Anywho.
yeah. Good point. Good idea, Jeremy. So the
Let's
reason
jump
we're
in.
talking about, yeah, I was going to say, we've already said we're going to be building a starter adventure, something that'd be good to run, especially as kind of like if you're a beginner DM or you have a lot of beginner players. This would be a very good kind of jumping on point for D&D. And that's why we're doing it, is because we think it's useful to have like a simple resource like that you can turn to and be like, oh yeah, well, this is an adventure that I know I can run and that will go over well and will be pretty easy to do. And get your players like hooked and wanting to keep playing.
And even though it's great, especially for newer DMs and newer players, it's really good for your veterans too. Sometimes you just want to play a nice, simple game of D&D. Sometimes you don't want to have the massive, overarching, complex stories. And this is a great way to get into a campaign without forcing yourself into that kind of stuff. So you can always do one later. You can always add that into the story as you go. But this is a great way to go in without having to worry about that kind of baggage. And of course, this topic is going to be mostly focused at GMs. But if you're a player and there is even the remote possibility you will ever GM in the future, this is an excellent episode for you to watch because this will be a great jumping off point.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess the first thing we really have to think about is how the hell do you approach making a starter adventure? What do we really mean by that?
Yeah, there's a lot to sort of go on there, and when you're first kind of sitting down and trying to conceive of what you want to run for an adventure, it can be overwhelming just because there's so much to take in. So we're going to kind of go through this step by step and start out with the bare bones, what we think is absolutely necessary. And as we kind of move on, we'll talk about some more like tricks and stuff we can make our adventure a little bit more interesting without too much work. But to begin with, we have to decide what stuff we definitely need to know in order to run whatever thing that we end up coming up with.
Exactly. And another thing to just really we want to focus on as we're going, not just what we need, but how do we get our players to bite?
Indeed.
Because that's kind of the next point is how do we tie people in? How do we get players to do the things you want them to do to move? So let's start talking about those kind of baseline necessities here. Obviously, the first thing we need is a setting where the adventure is going to take place. It can be a single location, it can be multiple locations, but you have to have an idea of what kind of place you're going to want the adventure to be. Where is it going to be?
Yeah.
Is it a forest? Is it a city? Is it a cave?
The next thing that you need is some kind of problem. And when I say problem, I don't necessarily mean a problem in the sense of like, someone's been kidnapped and you have to rescue them. And certainly that's an adventure hook. I say a problem, it's something that your players, you want them to try and accomplish. Be it rescuing someone that's been kidnapped, or rousting the goblins out of the local ruin, or collecting an item from a long forgotten place. It is some task that you want your players to do.
Exactly. And lastly, I think lastly, the big thing that you need is an inciting incident. Now, this could be an NPC telling you, hey, do this thing. Or this could be a lot more complicated, but basically, it needs to be something that will get the players moving in the right, get their characters moving in the right direction. Something that'll be interesting to the players, engaging to their characters, that will make them want to go forward and do the next steps toward starting your adventure in the first place. Because if they don't start it in the first place, it doesn't matter how great a problem or setting or all this stuff you've come up with.
Indeed.
If they just don't go do it. So
yeah, they gotta want to do it. That's a big one. And a lot of the times that's a little bit, at least for a newer party, I think that's a little bit easier than it sounds, because usually when they get see an inciting incident, they'll just take whatever the first thing they're offered, like, oh yeah, I want to do this. This is what we're here for. This is the thing. I want to do it. But it's good if that also plays into their just desires as a player to, maybe make some loot or something along those lines.
It's interesting because we've been saying this whole time, right? Starting adventure. And this is a great way to make a starting adventure. But this can also be really useful just throughout the campaign, especially if you're playing a more casual, non-arc based adventure. Like this can just be how you design every encounter or every sub adventure. It works great.
Yeah, agreed. I think what the thing that we end up building will actually end up being something that you could just swap in at any point in your game and just toss into your world. But it also works well as the first one.
So let's start diving into that setting, Pete.
Yeah, for sure. And we had talked about, Jeremy and I, this is the one thing we kind of discussed about this adventure in advance, but we decided a while ago, I don't know if you're still down to do it or if you want to go completely.
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
We decided a while ago to tie in a town that we built in DnDTime Worlds. For anyone who watched DnDTime Worlds, episode 3 specifically, it is a small town by the name of Barton. For anyone who has not watched that, I will tell you a little bit about Barton. And it's a town, we're choosing this because we know a little bit about it, and it's a little bit more fleshed out than just saying village. It's got a proper noun for us to use, but basically, it's just a very small, kind of classic rustic village. It has, a windmill is its most notable feature, which is a bar. Other than that, it's like a farming village. There are some pig farmers. It's just a very quiet life, pleasant folks. A simple medieval town. There are some things about it that were specific to the world that we're building, but we're going to forget about those. And we're just going to focus on this kind of rural village setting in a small town called Barton.
Yeah, in the context of your own campaign, this could be any small town.
Absolutely.
But the really core thing about Barton, we have decided one core feature that really makes it stand out, and that is going to be that grain mill. So maybe we can tie things around into that. We'll see. By the way, thank you, V-Bunny, for your Tier 1 subscription. We appreciate your support.
Thank you so much, V-Bunny.
Welcome to the party.
Welcome to the part.
Okay, we're not going to do that ever again.
I'm definitely going to do that again at some point, Jeremy. So
yeah, I know you will. Anyway, so, Barton, what's the reason for this adventure? What's going on?
Yeah, but we want to be our big thing.
Problem? And the problem isn't always necessarily... I feel like calling it the problem isn't necessarily the right way to go about it, because sometimes it's a place that you find, like it's a discovery. But
like I said before, when I was choosing the word problem, my thought was it was like a math problem, even like a thing to do.
Yeah,
is how I meant it. So when we say problem, that's what we're referring to, is just the main task. And what do you want that to be? I assume at some point we're going to incorporate monsters.
Yeah, well, it's got to be actionable, right? Something we can do. It's got to be something that can be reasonably easily, solved or figured out. And it's something
we're going for something for one session.
Yeah, it's got to feel like it's within their grasp, right? If it's like the Warring Kingdom is stopping trade, it's like, okay, that's a big problem. That's not an easily attainable task, versus like, I need let's talk about Barton. Let's figure out a problem for Barton. We said there's a windmill.
Which is a bar, which is a tavern.
What's be really cool, Pete? If this windmill, so it's used to grind the grain, probably, right?
The specific thing about the grain mill was that it was an old converted windmill that's a tavern.
Yeah, and maybe they grind the grain, or they grind something to make a special brew or whatever.
I like that.
So what if there's a piece inside of the windmill that's broken, like a special piece of lumber that is only found deep within the forest, because you need very strong lumber for this windmill, because it's very heavy. And so that is your problem, is you need to go out in the forest, you need to you need some wood. You need to get some wood. That is an easily attainable, an easily actionable problem. It's easy to solve. You just go into the woods and you find the tree that is made of the wood, and it's something you should be able to just do. Maybe the barkeep of Barton can offer some kind of reward. Maybe it's as simple as whenever you're in Barton, you get free drinks and free lodging. Maybe it is something more like, we'll give you some gold. Whatever
you feel like works for your particular campaign. And arbitrarily for just for, since we're building this adventure now, I like the idea that the Tavern Keep of Barton, which we had named Jacoby a while ago, so I say we keep that, is going to offer the players free free drink and food for the duration of the stay if they accept this quest.
So let's talk about that inciting incident now. What is the incident that pushes the players to do this? You know what? I think it'd be a really cool one. And Pete, feel free to interrupt me because I'm just running with it.
Oh, well,
But
in that case, I have a really cool one.
oh, Pete, let's hear your really cool one first, and then I'll blow yours away with my even cooler one.
Oh no! Now there's so much pressure on me. My thought was that when they go into the bar, and I think this is a great place to just start your adventure. Upon going into the bar, they find out that the tavern has run dry. There are no drinks because the mill isn't working. Everyone in the tavern is kind of rowdy and grumpy. There are people complaining. It's very kind of clear what the issue is in the space. And in order to get things up and running again, they found out that from the tavern keep, after inquiring about it, that they need this part, and he offers to pay it.
That is pretty much exactly like I was going to say. But I would have taken it like one step further, and so they got their special drink, and maybe someone they meet on the road on the way to the tavern tells them about the special drink that you just have to try. Because otherwise, you go into the tavern with no drink. I don't know. I think there's a reasonable chance that, let's go to a different tavern. Let's leave. But I think that's the right idea, right? Maybe there's a special drink they want there. Maybe it's just the people are grumpy and this is just where they are. There's not another tavern in Martin. So both of those work really well as kind of ways. I mean, they're both really the same idea. Can we think of another inciting incident?
Another inciting incident? I think another fun option would be to have the tavern break while they're in there. As they go to order it, they hear the mill itself kind of snap, and a piece of grain and the big kind of chunk of wood flies out, maybe force one of them to make a dex saving throw, or it hits one of the players directly. And then they have kind of a fun moment, one where they probably will start negotiating with the barkeep for free stuff because they were injured in his grain mill. And also, then he can say, well, fix it, and we'll figure something out when you get back.
Yeah, I mean, that's another totally workable one. Yeah, I was thinking maybe there's a storm coming through, right? And they need to get this part to reinforce the windmill so that it doesn't, like, break and collapse and destroy the building, right? Maybe they're worried. It was, like, really rattly last time a storm came through or something. So all of these are just simple, really straightforward reasons as to why do the people care enough to offer a reward to the heroes, and there you go. So I think with the town of Barton, that's a really straightforward one, and that can be any town. You can just say any single town has this windmill that is the tavern, and throw it into your game, and boom, you're good. You can even take existing towns like any town in the Forgotten Realms, say Red Larch or Yartar or whatever, and as long as they don't have super specific story-related things in your adventure, you can do that. You can just say, yeah, the tavern's a windmill, and this is why it's got a thing, right? Super, super simple. So we have an inciting incident. We have a problem.
Yep. And now we need to start kind of creating our threats and the reasons why that problem is an adventure and not just a thing that, like, the adventure is not going to be, all right, we walk to the forest and get the wood and come back. We give it to him. Adventure complete. There's going to be some obstacle. There's some reason why these adventurers are being asked to do this and not just the regular folk of the town of Barton.
Yeah. So let's start brainstorming some simple combat. So right now, let's think of our setting, right? Our setting starts in a tavern.
Yes.
And then goes into a forest. So let's start thinking about, like, what kind of threats do you find in a forest? I guess the first thing we need to answer, right, is do we want them to stay in the forest, or is there something else in the forest that they run into? I think in this case, they probably stay in the forest, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by stay in the forest.
I mean, you don't worry about it. So, like, they have to go deep into the forest, is I think what we've
yes,
to, right?
Yes. And so some of the threats that one could find in a forest would be, I think the first obvious one is sort of wild beasts. Things like wolves and bears that are kind of roaming the woodlands. Another sort of obvious one to me is uh, navigation, and just moving through the forest is itself a little bit difficult. It's probably an isolated location, and finding it using kind of tracking skills or your sense of direction to locate it could also be a bit of an obstacle. Trying to find this presumed grove where these old kind of hardwood trees are.
Hmm. And of course, the last kind of potential threat you could find, I say the last, but there are so many potential threats. But another you could really come up with is humanoids, right? Bandits. You run
Indeed.
into bandits in the forest. So we've decided at this point they start in a tavern, they go
Mhm.
into a forest, and yeah, but actually been chat. Walking, and I'm stuck in a web. Giant spiders are another very real threat. Um, So at this point, we're starting off the adventure. We've got our problem. We've got our inciting incident. We figure the party's going to bite. They're going to go into the forest. So the next question, right, Pete? How long do we want this to take?
um,
Right? Is this going to be like a 1 day in-game adventure?
I think that would probably be what we would shoot for with this. I think especially as a first time, if this is presumably your first adventure with a group,
Hmm.
you want this kind of thing to be
In and out.
started and completed, so they have this sense of accomplishment once the adventure is over.
Yeah, I think that's cool too. And
Yeah.
just because it's 1 day in game doesn't necessarily mean it has to be one session. Uh, if they're spending a lot of time going through a dungeon or something, it could take you multiple sessions to do a single in-game day.
Yes.
Otherwise, other times it can just take one session to
Oh,
do months in
I
game.
misunderstood. I was saying that we should try and shoot for something that can be accomplished in one session. Although I don't
Oh,
necessarily feel
okay,
strongly about 1 day.
okay, sure. I see. I was. That's exactly what I meant. That's yeah. Obviously, we want this starter adventure to be like a one session deal. Um,
Yes.
and so the question is, how long do our characters spend? Right? Is it right in the forest? Is it just you head in for 4 or 5 hours and then you come out,
I feel like
or is it
one.
deeper? I think it's deeper,
Yeah, I
right?
think deeper. One for verisimilitude. Like this is why adventurers are doing it. It's kind of a hike,
Yeah.
and it's dangerous. Um,
Hmm.
and then you start to get into the category of having things like kind of overnight and keeping watch, which are fun elements. And you're starting to kind of it starts to feel more of an adventure if there's some time that you describe passing.
Yes, I completely agree. You know what else would be cool? What if it grew in some hills out in the forest, right? So this forested hill, just so
Yeah,
that
I like
we
that a
can
lot.
kind of change the terrain a little bit. So we're breaking the adventure into segments. There is traveling through the forest, where it's just flat forest land. Maybe
Mhm.
there's underbrush, there's trees, um, and then there's the hilly forest where there's big boulders and stuff. Um,
I think
and
that's a great idea.
yeah, and that's a cool way to make it a little more interesting as to like, well, the different environments. So, what kind of enemies do we want?
I mean, the
Or
kind
maybe
of
not
obvious.
enemies, but what kind of
I
challenges,
What kind
right?
of threats?
Obstacles.
Yeah. I think for one thing, just some arbitrary roving wild beast is a good kind of threat in the forest. I don't think it necessarily even has to be a combat encounter, unless they choose to make it one. Something that could be easily intimidated away, or something that, you know, just something to show that the forest has some danger and to make them feel. I think like a low level threat like that. Pack of wolves is
Yeah,
like a classic one.
yeah. Some wolves make a pretty good option. Um,
A bear is like a
yeah,
more threatening one. There was
I mean, my
giant
my
spider as
only
an idea.
my qualm with using like a wolf or a bear, I think they're good, but they don't feel fantastical enough for me. If
To
that
me,
makes sense. That's why I don't use
Jeremy,
them a lot.
it sounds like you're moving on to sort of like a something like a bear, but maybe a little bit more fantasy-ish. Can you
No,
think of?
owlbears would kill first level characters.
Yeah, I know.
No, absolutely not. That's okay. So there's the next question. Think about the kind of monsters you want to use and the progression. So you're going to want weaker monsters at the beginning and stronger monsters at the end. So, like Pete was saying, a pack of wolves, let's say 3 wolves. That's a pretty good kind of softball, not softball, but starter battle. 3 wolves versus 4 players. The players outnumber the wolves, um, and it shouldn't be all that bad. Um, it should be a pretty easy encounter for them to fend off along the woods, especially if it's getting late. So
Mhm.
let's say they're leaving Barton, and you can just tell them, yes, it's late in the day by the time you arrived in Barton. So as you're leaving, it's maybe like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It's going to be dark soon. And as you're traveling through the forest for a few hours, it gets toward dusk. And that's when the wolves show up, right? So that's a really great way to start off the adventure. And that's especially great because they fight these wolves and then they have to take a rest and set watches. And that's just like, oh God, are more wolves going to come? Right.
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
watches are a
Oh,
relief element to include.
I see. Chat is saying we should include a hill giant.
A
Uh,
hill giant.
I'm not sure how I feel about
Maybe
that.
maybe at the very end as a final boss in a situation where it's advantageous for the players and they can like run it around a lot and outsmart it. But I don't feel like that as a random encounter would be appropriate for first level characters. It
Be
would
a
just be a
dick.
lot of one shots. Yeah. Uh,
Well, so we got our first encounter. They get attacked by 3 wolves.
yes. And I
And
know you're saying wolves aren't fantastical, but I even like that about them a little bit
yeah,
because then once we start moving into more fantastical elements, it feels like as the forest is getting deeper, so are the threats getting stranger. I like that kind of vibe.
yeah, I think that's actually cool. Oh, that's actually super cool. So they have their first start. They get into the woods. They fight these wolves. They take it. They have their camp, and they rest up. And I think rather than kind of so a lot of DMs will think of is like, oh, I should roll a random encounter at this point, right? Because they're taking a rest. They're staying in the woods overnight. How do you feel about random encounters in this context?
Um, I guess it very largely depends. Personally, I don't really even use random encounters. If I'm doing a random encounter, like if it's something that feels like a random encounter, it means I've decided that I want something to come after them in the night.
Hmm.
So I think if we're going to do a random encounter here, I wouldn't want it to be like just they get attacked by more wolves in the night because I don't think that's interesting, and I think it's just kind of that's just kind of going through the motions. Then, if we're going to do something shows up in the night, I would want to do like an encounter with maybe a little bit more kind of maybe. A druid walks into the camp at night because he sees they're making camp in his forest, or something more along like the interaction lines of things. I'm not big into a random encounter here.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. A lot of DMs will feel like they have to do random encounters, and you don't.
Yeah.
Your adventure is no less because you decided not to do a random encounter. So I agree. I don't think random encounters are the right place to go here. Farful, I'm sorry, we're not going to have albino dwarfs rush into their camp in the middle of the night. But so our players have gone out. They left Barton. They've stopped. They fought some wolves. They camped in the woods. The next morning, I think we run into their next challenge. And Pete, hear me out. I think their next encounter should be a river.
That's fun. I like
It's
it.
just a river.
Yep.
It's a river. It's running fast. It's maybe 20 feet wide, and they have to get to the other side.
Are we in the hilly forest at this point?
I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're still on the way to
maybe this kind of marks the boundaries. The water kind of collects at the basin of the hills.
I really like that. So now we're also getting some cool some framework here, some storytelling.
The logic tracks there, to a degree at least.
Yeah. So what happens at this river? Is there a bridge with like a troll under it? They need to do something to get past the troll.
That's the classic.
I mean, or is it just a river and they have to figure out a way across without losing their stuff? Right.
I like that more, where it's just a natural obstacle that they just have to figure out some way to get across. It's moving very swiftly.
I like that idea. And so, as a dungeon master, right, you've put down this encounter, and you're like, well, how do they get across? The biggest thing that I see DMs always screw up is they come up with a solution, and then they think that is the solution. And that's not right. That's not the solution. That is a solution. And if you're trying to come up with like a puzzle like this, because this is a puzzle, this river, you've just thrown a river, it's a puzzle that they have to come up with the answer to. There isn't ever just one answer for something like that. You have to be willing to, like, if your players say, oh, guys, what if we cut down a tree? All right, you didn't expect them to cut down a tree. You can ask them, all right, with what axe? Any of you have hand axes or anything? And they say, oh, we don't have any axes. Right? You can ask those kinds of questions, and maybe there are repercussions for them taking their great sword and cutting down a tree with it. Maybe they damage their great sword, right? Maybe it snaps and now it's a short sword. But you can come up with all sorts of reasonable repercussions. Don't be a dick about it. But
And if they want to cut down a tree, as long as you have some kind of manner in which to, as long as you can justify it to even the slightest extent, for example, swinging a greatsword at it to cut it down, try and let
yeah,
their plan do what you want it to do. For example, maybe one of the players suggests, I want to look around in the river and see if maybe there are some boulders sticking out high enough that I could like jump between. Maybe you decide in
yep,
that case that they are. And then you can also be like, okay, yes, they are, but they're very slippery and hard to balance on, so there'll be a check there as well, but you could maybe get across like that. Let the world
exactly.
kind of change according to your players' ideas that they come up with.
I completely agree with Pete. A lot of the time, a dungeon master won't think of something, and so when a player asks about it, they'll say no. And you're playing in Dungeons and Dragons, right? You're playing collaborative storytelling game. You're playing a collaborative improvisation game. So the key to improv, to doing improv well, is yes and. They say, "Oh, are there big rocks that maybe we could hop across?" You say, "Yes, and they're slippery," or "Yes, but they're slippery."
Yes.
Right? You roll with what they ask, and adjust it to continue to make it a challenge. There are going to be times where they just trash your puzzle and they trivialize it, and there's really nothing reasonable you can do to still make it a challenge, and that's fine because
Yeah.
they came up with a cool thing.
Yeah. And
Um,
they'll probably feel happy about just absolutely dunking the puzzle.
Now, Pete, what are the repercussions for them failing
That's what
this
I was
river?
just.
Right, for them falling into the river,
I
because we
think
need we
there's
need repercussions.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are a couple of options. I think we could go with you had mentioned before them losing their stuff. You could say that they get battered on rocks and take a little bit of damage as they're moving across, or we could say maybe they get drawn down river and thrown off course to some degree.
Yeah, I see some people were saying in chat. I know Farful and a couple others saying like, "Oh, put crocodiles in the river," or quippers is another very common
Quippers would be
threat.
the
Uh,
scary one. Oh, the
but
Quipper swarm.
I don't think you need to do that. I don't think you need to put a monster in the river. I think having the river being the challenge is it's showing that it's not just monsters that you're fighting, right? It's
Yes,
the world that you're beating. Um, so personally, I wouldn't say in your starter adventure to do that. Yeah, like
I'm
Pete
in
was
agreement.
saying, I also wouldn't use gear, or at least I wouldn't use gear without making it possible for them to get it back. So let's say the paladin goes to jump across the river and rolls a natural one on their deck save and slips and falls in, and you decide, oh yes, your shield gets washed downstream. Okay, that's fine. They'll say like, "Oh, what do you mean it gets washed downstream?" I'm like, yeah, you can see it getting washed downstream. And they say, "Oh, I chase it," right? And now you can give them some way to get it back. Maybe there are beavers who built a dam and it's caught in the dam, and you have to fight these giant beavers. Which, here's a hint: if you have a monster that you don't have a stat block for, like giant beavers, just pick
Amen.
any monster that's similar, like a black bear, and say, "Yes,
Giant
this
badger
giant
sounds
beaver
perfect to
is
me.
it giant badger is a great one. Yeah, just take the giant badger stat block and say this is a giant beaver. Perfect. Like super easy to do.
Yep.
And that's a great it's like that's the consequence to you failing to the river puzzle is now you have to fight these giant beavers. And maybe the druid in your party is like, but they're just beavers. They didn't do anything. And this has some great opportunity for social interaction where them failing the puzzle or screwing up the puzzle or not having a complete success was actually an awesome new opportunity to build out this collaborative story you're putting together. Here's Pete that you have
Uh,
frozen.
Jeremy, Skype has dropped.
Pete, why do you keep doing this to me? You terrible, terrible man.
I
All
don't
right, guys,
know,
Pete's
man.
going to get really warped in about 2 seconds as he comes back.
Don't forget to turn off your microphone, Jeremy, or mute your microphone.
Pete, your webcam's still not up, bud.
Oh man, what is up with that?
You got to fix your
I will
webcam.
turn it on and turn it back, turn it off and turn it back on again.
Anyway, while we wait for Pete to get back, um, Pete, at least you're frozen on a confident face.
Oh well, that's good.
Um,
I saw the face. That's a.
yeah.
I'm just gonna completely quit Skype and go back in.
All right, Pete. So while Pete's having some difficulties getting Skype to function, um, Pete, you're still here, right? You're still here.
Oh, I'm still here in chat. Yeah, I can continue to talk. Go ahead and call me on Skype again now.
All right. Sorry about that, everyone.
Indeed.
Things get a little funky sometimes. I think. Yeah, Pete, you still have no video, buddy.
I do not understand why this could possibly be.
All right. Well, did you close Skype and?
Okay,
oh, you're
there you
back.
go.
Oh, Pete, you're really weird looking. It's okay. OBS is gonna fix that in 2 seconds.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry about that, man. We've switched over to Skype recently, and it's there are some technicalities that we haven't quite worked out all the kinks on yet. But
I
anyway,
mean,
we were
you
talking
could say
about
that.
yeah. We were talking about the beavers and the dam. Another thing I was going to recommend is if you're going to lose an object, have them lose objects that aren't really important. Things that they wouldn't normally think about. Things like maybe their backpack where they have like their regular adventuring supplies. It's like now they don't have access to things like rations, which you would normally assume, and now they have to think about food. And you can have some fun role playing moments later on where they have to kind of like beg for food and shame from the other adventurers because their pack got washed down the river, or something like that. But not necessarily if you're not going to give them back things like shields and things that apply important mechanics for combat.
Exactly. You don't want to totally gimp a character because they failed at this one check. You don't want to say, "Well, wizard, your spell book washes away. Have fun not being a character,
nerd."
You don't want to do
relied
that.
on books so much.
But yeah. Anyway, so
river.
If something important is going to get lost, make sure there's a way to get it back, and be clear that there's a way to get it back. So they've beaten the river, they've gotten across this river,
and now they're in the hilly kind of forest, and that's where I think things are going to start getting a little bit darker. Maybe the trees are denser, and they don't necessarily see the exact tree they're looking for, and they have to go in deeper, but they can tell that they're kind of getting on the right track.
You know what I think is an excellent opportunity to do here at this point, and I love doing this. One of my personal favorite random encounters, I say random encounters, right, is as soon as they enter this more dark, ominous place, maybe it's more hilly, it's rocky, the trees seem to loom, it's darker, not as much light gets through. Have them see up ahead just a skeleton at the foot of a tree that looks like its ribs are all crushed and it's just sitting at the base of the tree. And I'll tell you, your players will freeze and they'll be like, "Oh, what?
Why?
Why is there a skeleton at the base of this tree?" And maybe you can describe it, right, as wearing dented and crushed in like half plate, right? Give the implication that this was an adventurer and somehow they befell their fate. And I don't know about you, Pete, but to me at this point, that's a great opportunity to have a plant monster, some sort of plant-based threat that maybe killed that adventurer from the tree.
That sounds perfect for this particular point.
It's a skeleton tree. The tree grows skeletons. Farfel, that is actually a goofy, fun way to tie something in. You could do that, which would definitely give it a very dark whimsy. But I like the tree-based monster. This is a trope I use a lot, and it foreshadows this ominous threat, right? And maybe if players are careful and they investigate very carefully, they can discover this plant-based monster before it attacks.
And I think a couple of great options for plant-based monsters, ones that come to mind, are the blights. Perhaps any of the blights really could work. Maybe the branches of the kind of, maybe this tree's a little bit gnarled and dead that the skull is around, and the branches of the tree are twig blights, or kind of some heavy vines grow and there's a vine blight that's hanging around the trees. How do you feel about blights here, Jeremy? That's the one that at least speaks to me.
Yeah, so you want to pick monsters that are like a reasonable challenge for your players. You don't want something that's going to just kill them.
Indeed.
The kind of quintessential tree monster, tree assassin, is the assassin vine. That's a little too high level for our first level characters, but I think that vine blight is going to make a really, really great threat for this option.
I agree.
And maybe you don't want something that's quite as human-y as a vine blight might look. No, it's not a hill giant Farfel. It's not not yet. Uh, Something else you could do is you could just open up the monster manual, go to the very end, look at constrictor snake, and say, "Yep, it is a vine. This constrictor snake is a vine. It is a tree snake, and it just is part of the tree."
Yeah,
And
that
you can do
works
that.
really
It's
well.
totally fine. And that works really well because it's got a constrict, right? It grabs the players and crushes them and pulls them closer. Having these kind of foreshadowed threats that are not overtly obvious, but there's definitely something going on is cool.
Yeah, and
Personally, oh, go ahead.
I was going to also say, and flavoring stuff like that on the fly, that can be a little bit difficult, I think, at first. And like Jeremy was able to just pull out that constrictor snake because he's played so much 5th edition and he knows every monster in the monster manual. But it's good to just kind of like take your time and look over stuff, and even if it's not dead on, even if you can't find that perfect thing, and that was a perfect one, Jeremy, the vine for the snake, you can even flavor stuff that is approximate. You know, you can just
the twig blights would have been fine.
Yeah, you can take the twig blight. You can take a goblin even and just say it does about a goblin's worth of damage, but it grapples when it hits.
There you go. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I'd highly recommend that kind of stuff if you're unsure. Pick something you know is a reasonable threat for them and just use its stat. And
A
just say it's
goblin's
something
worth
else.
is my favorite unit of measurement.
Marvel's saying an actual real solution for a low level monster that's freaky, a death dog. That would be cool. I want to use a death dog later on in this, I think. But once they actually get to this tree, that'd be
Death Dog scared the hell out of me the first time I played.
Scary as shit.
Oh man, it wasn't even the dog itself; it was the disease that the Death Dog gave to.
Let's at this point, right? They've traveled through. Why would they stop to look at the skeleton? Obviously, they've seen it. So this is where you can dangle your first loot in front of them, your first like magic item or something. Maybe this skeleton that's crushed in there has incredibly rusted, tarnished armor. Like I said, it was crushed in half plate, and the bones are all broken, and there's an old red cape that is just tattered and shredded, and a perfectly pristine silver dagger.
The butt.
And then they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, that one's different," right? Putting something different directly next to something that is, this juxtaposition of beautiful shiny versus weathered and worn is going to, no matter what, your players are going to ask, well, why?
Yes.
Even if they don't say it out loud, they're going to think, why is that one different?
And odds are, if they have any fantasy experience, they're going to go, because it's awesome and I can use it as a, like,
even if they don't have fantasy experience.
It's got bonuses on it.
Even if you describe it as a pristine, beautifully engraved dagger, right? Yep. They're going to either say, it's worth a lot of money.
Yep.
Cool. It's magical. Cool. It's a trap. Still cool.
Cool.
That still makes them, like, oh no. And when they then discover, oh, it was the tree that killed it, that probably wasn't a trap. That's when they're going to realize, all right, it's either really valuable or magic. And they're going to be really excited about it.
And another thing I like about this is you have now established these vines as a threat in the forest. After they have moved past this point, they're going to be looking around, and you can tell them that they occasionally will see these things, and they now get to make the decision, well, we'll skirt around it. We've learned, we're growing, we're navigating, we're learning about the setting that we're in.
And you know what I love? I love this idea. So at this point, they've gone through, they've found their problem. They need to collect this piece of wood. They've gone through, they fought some wolves, they've rested, they've crossed a river, maybe successfully-ish. They've fought some plants, and they're up in this rocky, hilly, dark forest, right? It's creepy, it's ominous. They were immediately greeted by this dead thing at the base of a tree. What do we want to have them fight now? I remember Farfel mentioned Death Dog. I think that'd be really cool. as
See,
a random encounter.
what I'm interested in here, though, because I feel like this is kind of, if we want to kind of plan for one session, this is where we're getting to our climax and they're finding the tree,
You're
correct?
probably right, yeah.
I feel like if we want to do, maybe we can mess around with a death dog, but I feel like we want to add something with a little bit of sentience here.
You know what? Let's go with that hill giant.
You want to go with the hill giant?
So let's say
And
they've climbed up a. Sorry, go ahead, B.
I was gonna say, whatever we have that is sentient, we can give them a death dog.
So they're climbing up the hill, and they get to the top of the hill, and they look down, and they can see maybe the forest. Maybe we haven't at this point even decided what kind of wood they need. Um, so
It's probably
let's
a
say,
cool fantasy wood that we're gonna make up right now, right?
yeah, it's called Dreadwood. Uh, that's what it's called, and it only grows in the trees of dread, out in the forest. And I've just made that up, and that's fine. You can just pull shit out of your ass. So they need this dreadwood. They get to the top, they look down, and they see a forest of just dead-looking trees, and maybe that little forested area with the dead-looking trees they have leaves, but maybe they're blood red leaves, kind of drip red liquid that looks like blood, and that's why they're called the dread tree. Um, so
The name that I was gonna come up with.
unobwoodium,
I just want to share the name I came up with, Jeremy, and the name that I
sure.
had for the tree was the dire oak.
Dire oak, I like that one too. I like
But I like
unobwoodium though. I
uh,
like this one a lot. Let's go with dire oak. Dire oak's easy.
oh, I was also like yours anyway. Anyway, sure, whatever, whatever. Um,
So they
dire
see,
dire oak.
yeah. So let's say that they see the small copse of trees. It's small, and they see their big threat. Right? They see the giant. And he is maybe just walking around and he's playing fetch with his death dog. And you describe the horrifying death dog. And as a dungeon master, you've maybe looked at the hill giant and you're like, I really wanted to use a hill giant here, but they're CR5. And my players are all going to die because these things deal more damage in one hit than my players have hit points. Um, so the question, right? How do you solve this, right? This is a puzzle again. Um, and yeah, how do you do that, right? Maybe we shouldn't use a hill giant. I think that's a little too high. But
Or
let's say you really wanted to.
maybe we can flavor a bugbear as a hill giant, as like a smallish hill giant.
Hmm.
Um, they are
I'm too
comparable.
worried about this hill giant. Farfel, you're a level 1 character. I'm a little worried about this hill giant.
Uh,
So,
I mean, death dogs are also pretty scary. That's a CR2,
yeah,
I think.
are they really? Holy crap.
I believe so. I might be wrong.
They're
Maybe it's
CR1. I never use death dogs. I
Okay.
very rarely. But anyway, so death dogs are these terrifying two-headed black dogs. These very large hounds. And a hell giant is a small giant. I say small giant. It's like a 15-foot high giant. Pretty big.
And
So
well, as an idea here, we already established that he's playing fetch, and the death dog is running around in this copse. Maybe the dire oak trees are very hard to break sticks off of, and they can't pull it. But they're playing fetch with a stick from the dire oak tree, and
I love this. Yep.
and that's a very obvious one that they could get. So if they try and like cut one off, it's going to make a ton of noise. But if they could like steal the branch from the death dog, they would have what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. So how do they do that? Well, I can think of one obvious solution, right? They try and lure the death dog away with the branch. And maybe so at this point you need to be very clear to your players that this giant seems like something that's way too powerful for them to fight.
Yes.
For them to fight direct. And you can literally just tell them that.
Yep.
At this point, you can say this thing is so large. I mean, it has the power to just break one of these branches off. It has to be way too powerful for you guys to fight right.
Yeah.
And the player's like, oh shit, okay. And so they start to look around to maybe come up with a solution. Say, you notice some more of those vines you saw earlier.
I was about to say the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe they see some vines. Maybe they find the source of that river. Like they find that river again. It comes back up to this level. And they think, and and you don't even have to plan on a way for them to figure out how to get the stick. You can just come up with ideas and just let it roll, right? Give them
Mhm.
things to work with. A player might think, oh, the river comes up here and it's running really fast. Let's quickly get like a log to push in and use as like a getaway canoe, right? Maybe they think, let's just steal the stick real quick, run away, and try and get away on the river. And you, the DM, maybe didn't think of that at all, but that's fine. You can let them do that, and that's
Yeah.
cool. Uh,
That sounds like a lot of fun, and I'm seeing all of these different encounters you can do. And if you're telling them that the creature is too hard for them to fight, they're going to start thinking about using their environment. And we've already told them so many cool things in the environment, like Jargo was saying, the river, the vines. They'll try and maybe bait the giant to walk over near some of the vines that are hanging down, and the giant will probably fall for it, assuming they make some kind of deception or check or whatever trick they're using. Maybe a wizard has a minor illusion or something like that to draw the giant over. And that's going to be really satisfying in that
yeah,
which was difficult for them is now working to their advantage.
and I see Roger twice and in chat. I'm not sure if I get quite this fancy in Start Adventure. You're absolutely right. This is getting a little deep with our kind of finale, but
Yes.
this could be literally anything, right? It doesn't have to be a hill giant. That is the extreme example because chat was saying it. Really, I
Yeah,
think what I'd
absolutely.
probably pick is like an ogre, something like it's
Yeah,
a
mindless
CR2 monster, or a bugbear is a CR1 monster, something more appropriately challenged, and just no death dog, and you're good.
When you were
Uh,
saying hill giant in my brain, I was kind of thinking an ogre, but yeah, hill giant's
yeah,
like 5, isn't it?
yeah, it's monsters. Yeah.
Yeah, hill giant's way off.
But anywho, um, yeah, and I think what's interesting, what I would do personally is once they've come up and defeated this monster, come up with their solution, got the stick, got away, whatever. At that point, and this is something I do, but Pete, you can tell me how you feel. I would just say, and you make it back to Barton.
I would have done the exact same thing. Yep.
There's no need to go back and deal with the river again. And
That's a thing that you'll see every week in almost every D&D time adventure, where once the thing is done, they just and you've won.
you can just narrative leap back, and that's totally fine. There's really nothing wrong with it. Now we've taken a long time kind of going over the starter adventure, but let's talk about a few of just. I know we're getting late, but Pete, would you mind if we took a couple minutes to talk about like what starter adventures we like to run? Because I have one that I've either run or played in a couple of times. It's a very straightforward kind of adventure that I know I'd like to.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Jeremy? Take us away.
Yeah, so the adventure I've either run or played in this 4 or 5 times, I think. It's a very basic framework, and you can play it a whole bunch of different ways. You can make it as high level or low level as you want, and it's a really simple idea. So the players are out in the forest, right? That's the kind of gimmick. That is a starting hook. You are in the forest as an adventuring party. You can say that they're headed to a nearby town. You can say that they are out treasure hunting. You can just give them whatever reason for why they're there, or maybe that you're just tossing this into an adventure you're playing. But regardless, they find themselves in the forest. And as they're going, they begin to see ruins, little bits of ruined like column or ancient brick or something heavily overgrown by the vines. And they hear guttural like yelling, grunting, or whatever in the distance. The players immediately think, "Oh, there's something in the distance. It's guttural. It's probably scary. It's probably mean." If they don't make that connection, at that point, I would probably take the liberty as a dungeon master to remind them, yeah, you remember from the last town you were in as you were heading out, someone at the tavern warning you about the orcs that live in the forest. And then they're like, oh, this is probably the orc. So they go, they look. And as they sneak up, they look into this clearing where they see an orc and some goblins. And the orc is yelling at the goblins, saying, like, it's supposed to be right here, or whatnot. And they're obviously looking around for something in this clearing. You see ruins, you see rubble, and you see in the center of the clearing a small, like, pedestal that's just there. that stands out, and the sun shines right down on it. Very obviously important. The players fight the orcs, and there's that first problem. Well, it's not really a problem, it's a discovery. They've discovered this clearing, and the inciting incident we actually just talked about, and that is the orc saying it's supposed to be right here. When the orc says that, the players make the connection that there's something important here. If you're playing this at a higher level, it could be anything like a bone naga, like a guardian spirit that's here. And then it can be like, I am the guardian of this place. And they realize, oh, this is a place that has a guardian, it's probably important. Right? This inciting incident tells them there's something here. They have that first combat versus the guardian naga, or versus the orc and the goblins, or versus whatever, depending on what level you're at. And they start looking around. As they look around, they see in the pedestal there is a kind of squished hexagonal hole that just goes straight down into darkness. And the players are like, "What the hell's that?" And they say, "Yeah, it's this weird, like it's like a hexagon but squished, so it's a lot taller than it is." And this can be any kind of puzzle you want. This can be a crescent-shaped hole in it that maybe lines up with the crescent moon. This can be whatever. But in this case, I choose a squished hexagonal hole where you're supposed to put in a sword. And as they explore around the ruins to maybe figure out what goes into this obvious keyhole, oh, there are some statues. Oh, look, this statue's holding a sword that seems to come loose from his hand. And cool, you take the sword, you stick it in, they figure it out. They've got the puzzle. Just from, I look around, they say, I look around, and you tell them what they find. And it's a super simple, basic puzzle of why this place hasn't been discovered and how to get in. Sorry, Pete, you were saying something and I cut you off.
Oh, no. I was just saying I liked that little puzzle.
Thank you. I like it too. I've run it a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different simple puzzles, but these kind of very basic, like, if you look around, I'll tell you what you find, and you'll probably find the way in. That's kind of the shtick. So they put in this sword, and like it fits perfectly, and it locks in, and you can say that there's a shifting of stone, and a passage opens up in the ground, and little bits of dirt and things fall through, and you see a set of steps leading into darkness. And that just leads into a basic dungeon. You can put whatever monsters you want down there. Maybe you put some little skeletons. Maybe you put some rats. And at the end, maybe you put some kind of lesser ghost creature. Maybe like a specter is fairly low level. And at the end of it, there's a tomb. And that's where they fight the specter. And there's some cool magic items and treasure in there. Great. Awesome. The thing that's driving the players is this discovery, right? We found something cool that's been sealed away and obviously important enough to build a thing to. So that implies there's probably good treasure. And then you put treasure at the end, and the players are all happy. It's a very straightforward, simple starter dungeon. You can put in like a simple trap. I know one of the things I really like is they get to the bottom right at the beginning. They've opened up the puzzle, they've headed down, and the first thing that they see are spears sticking out of the wall and a skeleton impaled up against them.
The Indiana Jones.
And they're like, oh shit, there are traps here. So they start carefully moving forward down the tomb, right down the path. And then the skeleton attacks them. Because they didn't think, oh, the skeleton's going to attack us. No, it was the red herring of, oh, it set off the trap, it's dead.
And I think another way to play that is whichever way they assume is the right one, you can just pick the opposite in the moment.
Yeah, right? If they assume the skeleton's a monster and they beat the shit out of the skeleton, yeah, it falls apart. It's fine. And maybe you want to give it to them. Sometimes you want to just throw them a bone, especially if you've done a lot of these kind of adventures.
Yeah.
You let them be like, yeah, you figured it out, good work. But sometimes you let them feel a little paranoid.
The first time you want to get them, I think.
Yeah, but I know I went through that real quick right now. I mean, we spent 50 minutes going through that other one. I just did that one in 9, but that's a pretty straightforward kind of adventure. And in the tomb, they'll find some sarcophaguses to open up, skeletons. giant rats are a great enemy for first level characters. And if your players get beat up after an encounter, don't be afraid to tell them, yeah, do you guys want to like head out of the tomb and take a rest? Because a lot of players won't think that they can do that. They won't think, oh, I can just leave and come back. Right.
I can just come back later. I can take a nap.
But,
Power nap.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something I really love. I love running that kind of initial encounter, puzzle, small encounter, big encounter. That's kind of the formula I like. How about you, Pete?
My adventure, I've spoken about it. This is the one, like, if I need to play with a group of players I've never played with before, this is the one I usually run. It's a really kind of, it really kind of tries to play around with expectations a lot, is kind of the major theme of it. And the way I kind of set that up is players have received and accepted a quest to go bolster up a town guard. There's a big goblin attack that they're expecting to come in, and they're there to help some of the guards in the town kind of fend off this goblin attack. And when they arrive at the town, there's no one manning the gates. And when they eventually, the first kind of thought, oh, well, that's a little bit odd. They don't hear any sound coming from the town. And then when they eventually climb over the walls, they see within that the town has already been raided. The goblins have already destroyed this place. They kind of take some time. Usually at this point, the players are like, oh, well, what do we do? We'll look around the town. Let's see if we can figure out what happened here. That's always kind of the first instinct. So they start to kind of treat it like a little bit of a mystery. And as they're kind of learning things about the town, any kind of rudimentary investigation will tell them there's one chimney that's still lit. They'll go up to it, usually because that's kind of their big clue, and they'll find that there's one survivor in the town, and he has like goblin heads on pikes in front of his house, and he's built up like a little shelter for himself in the space. He's kind of this cantankerous old man type character. He'll tell them that they're too late, the goblins already came, he's sticking around to save the one little bit of treasure that is left. They took all of the loot, and he wants to get the treasure kind of back from their hideout, but he's not strong enough, so he's hoping he can pick them off one by one if they try to come back and roust them out of the town. But now that they're here, the adventurers can go and get this treasure, if they are so inclined. And generally speaking, they will be so inclined. And he only cares about one thing in it. He has like an heirloom within it that he wants. The players go out. There's a lot of kind of like smaller details that I have in there. There's a kind of an elaborate goblin trap where where it kind of plays on the expectations that goblins are dumb. And there's a trap that is just like a really obvious secret hideout into their house that the players will go into. And maybe it knocks some of them out. I have a couple of elements involving, if a player gets knocked out, they become overwhelmed by the goblins and taken prisoner. And there's a fun kind of get taken prisoner and sort of interact in that way mechanic. The other players, maybe players that weren't taken prisoner, can go and rescue, and the players that were can try to escape on their own using their skills. It's a big goblin fortress. At the end of it, it turns out it's just this kind of trap that the goblins set for adventurers, where they convince them that this town is in danger and trick them into getting all of their kind of better gear. As civilians aren't great to trick because they don't carry a lot of money, but adventurers usually do carry money and nice clothing and nice swords. And at the end of it, it's usually, the players kill a bunch of goblins in the fortress, and then the old man, who was a goblin in disguise, comes back and sees his family torn apart, and then that's kind of the big boss battle. And it's a goblin that I have souped up and given a bunch of abilities and stuff. But that's generally the idea, is they go in, they keep
That's a much more advanced starter adventure.
Yeah, well, that's my adventure. It's the one that I run. But it's just kind of this constant kind of flipping of, what the expectations are. First, it's like, well, we're not doing the town thing. Oh, these goblins aren't as dumb as we thought. Oh, the guy that we were friends with is mean to us. And that's my classic starter adventure, and it works pretty well, I find, consistently.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go again into too much detail on it because we're already over time, and I think there are some elements that are a little bit more kind of basic within that adventure as well.
Roger Twy has been saying in chat, a great resource for first encounters would be this one-page dungeon deal. I haven't actually looked at a lot of these. Um, Actually, I haven't really looked at any of them, but I've heard of it before. I'm going to post the links in chat right now. Feel free to check these out. I'm sure they're awesome resources. They look like they're community made, kind of, you print out one piece of paper and that's all the information you need to run the dungeon. So these are really awesome resources. And I'm actually really interested in looking at them.
I have looked at some of these before, I believe.
How were they, Pete? I mean, I'm sure they're great.
Yeah. The answer is yes, they are great. A
Wait,
lot of fun.
What link was deleted? That link? This is DnDTime posting.
Yeah, that's wild. DnDTime always does that. I'll try posting it.
But you're also DnDTime.
I know.
All right. Well, we'll figure this out. Maybe we'll post them in the Discord server for those interested. But yeah, coming up with a good basic starter adventure is a great way to get a campaign off on the right foot. Getting players to kind of work together and overcome these puzzles, and get a simple reward.
What do you think the little adventure we came up with? What do you think about the little adventure that we came up with? I like it.
Yeah, I do too. I think that we went off the rails at the end with the hill giant.
Yeah,
I think that would have been a lot better as like a druid with a death dog. I think would be a much better option. Maybe an evil druid who lives in the forest, and then you just open up to the back page. I think it's appendix B of the monster manual. Yeah, it's definitely appendix B. And I mean that druid is got to be like CR1 or 2. It's got to be pretty weak.
Yeah, or you could just build like a level 1 druid.
You could.
Weak, or really weak character.
Works either way. But yeah, I think those make really great. I think it makes a pretty cool adventure. I would actually really like it. I love putting a little puzzle, even if it's just how do you get across the river. I think it's really important to put a non-combat puzzle in because it just makes everything feel better.
Yeah, and I think that's probably going to do it for this conversation. At some point, we might write this adventure out and just have it as like a little adventure that y'all can reference on. No guarantees on anything there in terms of time frame, as there's a lot of stuff that we got
in a long ever actually.
As there's a lot of stuff that we got coming up, but that's something that maybe we'll do at some point down the road. And also, this is the thing that I wanted to talk about that I haven't said on. We were going to do this last week. Set up a Google form for people to submit questions, for us to add some questions to the end of talks here, where we just answer, whatever it is that you want to talk about, take maybe another extra 15 minutes or so and go through a few of those. We did not do that. And part of the reason why is because the method that we've decided with which to do that is via Twitter, because we have not been engaging with our Twitter in a major way, and we want to start doing that. So if you have a question that you would like us to answer here on DnDTime Talks, it can be anything. Please add us on Twitter with your question, hashtag DnDTime. And over the course of the next week, we will collect said questions and look at them, and hopefully we'll have a few good ones to answer.
Yeah, and we are at DnD_time.
Yes. There's a link to it, I believe, underneath the stream here.
There should be. If there's not, yeah, there is. All right, cool. We still got it there. We're good. Anyway, thank you everyone for hanging out with us. I know we got a little bit off the rails toward the end, but I think overall there's still a lot of really good, at least helpful, thought process in here that can help you come up with your own little adventure.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, thank you everybody.
You love D&D. Thank you for everyone who supports us, and for everyone who chipped in a little bunny today. We appreciate your support, everybody. Bionic Shiba, Reflected 10-8, Farful, and V Bunny. Yes, thank you all for your support. We appreciate it.
We really do. You guys are the best.
And if I missed anyone, I'm so sorry. But yeah,
I think that's about it.
If you love, well, I was going to say,
go ahead.
Stay tuned for Pete and Jeremy's D&D time on Friday. Should be good.
Yeah. I'm Pete.
I'm Jeremy.
And this is DnDTime Talks.
DnDTime Talks. Oh, so it tastes. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.